I'm trying to find stories today that are a little different, that are not the stuff you're seeing everywhere else on the dial. Other networks have chosen to go other ways. These are the stories that I think have been missed by a lot of people, and I'm going to go through them as best I can. Plus, later on, we're going to show you the raw tape of what it looks like when Donald Trump walks into a wall after he visits the Hill, and we're going to show you what it looked like when Vance met the Pope Leo in Vatican yesterday. It's quite funny. It's quite funny. I hope you'll enjoy this fly on the wall video that we have for you. All that is coming up on the narrative FiveStack today. The number 5 story on the FiveStack today is something that really has not received attention, and I was surprised to read about it. It's all about the Senate advancing the crypto regulation bill. So the Senate has advanced a cryptocurrency legislation that critics say will directly benefit President Trump's personal crypto ventures, including his UAE-backed stablecoin worth $2.1 billion. So after some resistance a couple of weeks ago, Democrats sort of caved, and the Genius Act, which passed a procedural vote of 66 to 32 as of yesterday, would legitimize digital currencies and likely increase the value of Trump's extensive crypto holdings, just as his family firm, World Liberty Financial, prepares to launch its own stablecoin. So you'll remember that there was a stablecoin announcement with Eric Trump, Justin son of Binance, and the son of Witkoff, the guy who's the Middle East advisor to Donald Trump. In the Middle East a few weeks ago, they announced that they were going to launch a stablecoin, a USD1 stablecoin through World Liberty Financial. That appears to be financed by the United Arab Emirates Sovereign Fund, who gave them $2.1 billion. Now, you'll recall a few weeks ago, we explained exactly how that works. There's a $2.1 billion that goes directly to the World Liberty Financial Organization. And in exchange for that, they will hold it there, I guess, for as long as they need to, and they can invest that money. Trump can make money off it. Chris Murphy thought it may be $85 million a year that they could make off that. Now, while that's happening, that funding that will secure the actual stablecoin, which will be issued on Binance, and that will be in like $2.1 billion of this USD1. The Trump stablecoin will be issued on Binance by the UAE, secured by the World Liberty Financial. So they're acting like a bank, really, who are securing this stablecoin, which is being launched through the UAE. So it's $2.1 billion directly into the pockets of Donald Trump, essentially. And what this bill does, this Genius bill does, which is anything but genius, is it basically allows there to be a regulation around the stablecoin industry. It's already a big industry, $250 billion, if I'm not mistaken. Senator Elizabeth Warren urged colleagues to oppose the bill, arguing it would turbocharge Trump's corruption. Of course it will. It will set them up with a whole lot of money for a whole lot of time in the future, and they'll be able to use it for whatever they need. And also the person I was most surprised by making the shift was Mark Warner, the Democrat senator from Virginia, who changed his position to support the bill. He said the U.S. can't afford to keep standing on the sidelines. So this is not good news, I think, for anyone who wants to oppose corruption. There's just too much of it. And clearly, the whole thing about Donald Trump being in the Middle East over the last few weeks was all about, that's one corruption story I really want to focus on today. The second corruption story I really think is important we focus on is another thing the Senate confirmed, which is they confirmed Charles Kushner, the father of Jared Kushner, as the next U.S. ambassador to France. Now, this is quite appalling because Kushner, this is the older Kushner, Charles Kushner, has a criminal history, including tax evasion and witness tampering. And yet the Senate, including Democrats, Cory Booker of New Jersey, crossed the line there to give them a 51-45 vote. And so that's why we see that this guy, Charles Kushner, you'll remember the story. He was once accused and found criminally liable for hiring a prostitute to seduce his brother-in-law, and then sent the tape to his own sister. So he recorded this encounter between his brother-in-law and a prostitute, and he used that tape and then sent it to his sister to show her that her husband was involved in an affair. This is the Kushner family, of course. But now it's also the representative to France for the United States of America. an absolute felon, an absolute criminal. Now, he also happens to be a big property developer. He comes from the same world that Donald Trump comes from. But it's quite unsightly that the Democrats were there supporting him, including Cory Booker, but also that Charles Kushner is now going to be the ambassador. Of course, the Jared Kushner part of the family has been keeping their distance from the White House in recent days, and that's understandable. They certainly had a rough time at the end of the first term, but they reared their head again at the end of the Middle East tour. We found out that Jared had been advising Trump on what was going on. And now we also found out just a few weeks ago that Kushner was involved in what is the attempted build of a Trump Tower in Serbia, which was on the Rachel Maddow show yesterday. So you've got tons of corruption still involved in the Kushner family, which say they're out of politics, but somehow they're still involved in all these deals to set up a tower in Serbia. Obviously, they got their father, Charles Kushner, now is the ambassador to France. They might be looking like they're keeping their distance from the political side of the family, but it seems to me that they're still very much involved. And that's particularly interesting because this tower thing is becoming really fascinating. This is, I think, story number 3, or let's call it 4.1. We saw the Serbia thing, and we saw it in Syria last week, where there was already conversation around if they could reach a deal with Ukraine and Russia, then the sanctions against the Syrian government would be dropped by America, all in exchange as well for another tower. This time there was a tower in Damascus. So you've got the tower in Serbia last week. This is Jared Kushner along with Eric Trump, along with the Serbian prime minister, wanting to turn a historic site into a Trump Tower in Serbia. Then you've got this news of the Damascus towers, which were promoted as part of this potential deal between Ukraine and Russia. That main deal may not actually happen, but it seems like the Syrian sanctions may be dropped. And who knows if that's because they're going to give a Damascus tower to the Trumps. But then comes this news today that the Vietnamese are also in discussion with Eric Trump as he visits the area to talk about a potential project in Ho Chi Minh City. Now, of course, the Vietnamese are engaged in tariff talks right now with the United States and are desperately trying to ease those tariffs that the United States put on them. And it's fascinating to me that we are in this environment now where everywhere Donald Trump goes, it seems that Jared Kushner and Eric Trump go behind him and are signing deals for their own personal fortune. In the first administration, they were certainly trying to avoid doing all this kind of stuff, but not this time. Apparently, it's okay for the Trump administration to go ahead and, the Trump organization to go ahead and build towers and to use foreign policy and foreign policy announcements to basically get what they want for their own personal enrichment as they travel around the world. Trump was at the Capitol Hill today trying to convince Republicans not to stop his big, beautiful bill. I get really annoyed that they called it a big, beautiful bill because, frankly, there's nothing beautiful about this bill at all. It's a disaster for most Americans. It sends the deficit sky high. It will probably accrue trillions of dollars of debt in the next 3 or 4 years. It gives nobody but the rich something and takes away from the poor. Traditional Republicans, people like Thomas Massey, the Kentucky representative, who has been determined to stop this administration from putting in so much extra spending. He believes that actually there needs to be a real reduction in the amount of spending so they can reduce the debt. He is part of this alliance which is stopping the Republicans from voting yes on this bill. And so the meeting happened today. Mike Johnson was there. He took Donald Trump around. He met the entire caucus. And what we saw was a very disheveled looking Donald Trump emerge with Johnson afterwards. And I got to show you the whole tape. It's just, to me, indicates firstly how he's not really listening to anybody in terms of criticism or opposition. He's lying about the content of this meeting because in this meeting, it certainly was clear that it was quite a tense meeting, that he wasn't winning over all Republicans. And then at the end, he looks so haggard and so tired. And then he walks into a wall, basically, on his way out because he just looks disoriented and old, which is just striking considering all the comments they've been making about Joe Biden. Let's take a look at what happened on the Hill today. I hope I can play this. Let's see.
He said you didn't adequately convince enough people to vote for the bill.
Yeah, that was a meeting of love. Let me tell you.
It was not a meeting of love.
There was no shouting. I think it was a meeting of love. There were a couple of things that we talked about specifically where some people felt a little bit one way or the other, not a big deal. And I covered them. It wasn't so much a speech. I covered certain points. And I think I'd be very surprised.
You told him you were losing patience. Are you losing patience?
No, I didn't tell him. Who told you I said I'm losing patience?
That's what we heard inside the room.
But it's a lie. Wait a minute. Wait. Who's told you that?
We heard from people inside the room.
Oh, really? It's totally true. I never used the term. I didn't say losing. I didn't even talk about it. In fact, it's the opposite. I think we're going to get it done. I'm not losing patience. We're ahead of schedule. Anybody that told you that is a liar. I never mentioned the word losing patience because I'm not losing patience. We're ahead of schedule.
That's why I asked you.
Why don't you go back to your source and tell them they're liars if the source even exists?
Passes the House.
Yeah.
Senators are already talking about making a number of changes. over
Sure.
their chamber.
Always
Is
have.
that okay?
Yeah.
Or do you want them to swallow
Yeah.
this bill?
In some cases, they have things that I like even better. No, it always happens. There'll be some changes. But John Thune and Mike have been very closely aligned on this. They've been moving it up together. Respect again. Thank you very much.
So here's let's maybe it comes later. We will see him walking into a wall at another tape in a little bit from now. So he wanders over here. He makes.
It was really a meeting of unity. We had tremendous unity. There's a lot of love in the room, and I think we're going to have a big victory.
What do you want the Republicans don't support this bill?
I think anybody that didn't support it as a Republican, I would consider to be a fool. It's a great bill. It's a great bill for America, more importantly. This is the greatest bill that will ever, I think it's the most important bill this country just about has ever done in terms of size and scope. That's why we call it the great, big, beautiful deal. It really is. The bill is, I think it's going to be one of the most important. It's the biggest tax reduction in history, biggest regulation reduction in history. Incredible for Medicaid, for Medicare. The only thing, we're going to leave it exactly as it was, other than for obviously waste, fraud, and abuse. We're strengthening it. We're going to make these things even stronger. The Democrats are going to destroy Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. And we're going to keep them, but even make them stronger. We're looking at a lot of things, but we'll see. I had a very good talk yesterday with President Putin. We'll see how that comes out. They're talking right now. We'll see how. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
And there he goes right into what seems like a wall. And Mike Johnson saying it this way. There were 4 lies, I think, there in one sentence. It's incredible to me that the Republicans are pretending that they're not attempting to cut Medicare. They're not attempting to cut Medicaid. Of course, they are doing all these things. And the fact that they say they're slashing the budget when they're actually increasing the debt to the points of trillions of dollars in the next 3 or 4 years is horrendous. This man is lying with every step and every word that he says. And when he comes out and he says that was a meeting of love, we know it wasn't a meeting of love, although it may have been successful enough to get this bill across the finish line. It may be that they have enough votes. And if they do, it'll be a really difficult situation for many of America's most needy people who rely on Medicare, rely on Medicaid. And also this notion that it's a tax reduction is just nonsense. It's only a tax reduction for the very rich. Disappointing that this is getting over the line. I was hoping that some of these Republicans would be emboldened to maybe stand up to the president a little bit more. Now, it's not all done yet. I think there's a vote tonight, if I'm not mistaken. We'll see what happens. This big, beautiful bill is not beautiful at all. This really is a bill designed to send America into a tailspin, and I think that's exactly what it will do, not to mention the incredible increase in the amount of the debt that it will increase. Did you see DHS Secretary Kristi Noem was on I guess she was testifying today in front of one of the committees, and couldn't even identify what habeas corpus meant. She said it was a constitutional right that the president had to be able to remove people from this country. That is not what habeas corpus means, of course. So she was schooled about what it really meant. Yet here we are, this person who is in charge of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, telling the senator that she knows what habeas corpus means. It's all about the president's ability to deport people. Of course, that's not the case. It's not what habeas corpus means. And the fact that she is out there making these statements, and she's the person who is, perhaps going to be the person making all the decisions around suspending habeas corpus for people who are being deported out of this country and being sent to other parts of the world to face these uncertain futures in jails like the El Salvador jail. The fact that she doesn't even know what she's talking about is incredibly telling, but it's not that unusual for this administration. It was Maggie Hassan who was questioning. For those of you who don't know, the habeas corpus is the legal principle that requires the government to provide public reasons for detaining and imprisoning people. In other words, if they arrest you or arrest anyone like you, they need to put out a statement saying why they are doing it. Now, if you suspend habeas corpus, it means the police, the government, the administration can arrest anyone and do anything with anyone that they choose without having to issue any public statements. They can keep you locked up for weeks, for months, you name it. And this is one of the things that's been going on with some of these undocumented immigrants that are being sent elsewhere, who are not being allowed to see lawyers, who are not being allowed to get access to their families, who are not even sometimes even being seen for weeks at a time unless there's a lot of pressure. So this is the Department of Homeland Security. This is a secretary of the Trump administration who can't even answer what habeas corpus means. Just a crazy day when you think about what's been going on on Capitol Hill. Finally today, let me cover the story of what's been going on at CBS News. CBS News' CEO, Wendy McMahon, and Paramount have decided to part ways. She's not going to be there anymore. She quit yesterday. And this is an indication, we believe, that what we're looking at here is the establishment of a settlement deal with the Trump administration. You'll recall the Trump administration, right at the start of the administration, they sued CBS and 60 Minutes for an interview that Kamala Harris did during the election campaign, where they selectively edited some of the things that Kamala Harris said. Now, the Trump administration are saying that is a defamation suit, or the basis for a defamation suit. We've now seen Bill Owens, the legendary executive producer of 60 Minutes. He's one of 3 executive producers to ever produce that show. He resigned a couple of weeks ago. You had that incredible moment with Scott Pelley, the anchor of CBS's 60 Minutes, going on the air and admitting basically that what we're seeing is a result of Donald Trump and the Trump administration. And particularly, they are holding up the merger of Paramount with Skydance, which is a private company owned by the Oracle founder, essentially. And what they're doing is Paramount is trying to sell Paramount to this Oracle guy. And what's happening is that 60 Minutes' independence is being traded in that whole process. So we've got new oversights happening at 60 Minutes, which used to be, and I can attest to this, a fully independent program. In other words, at CBS, if you're an executive producer, as I was of a show, you weren't really answerable to the corporate heads about what you were putting on the show. You had editorial independence. This is a tradition amongst executive producers in the past. It's no longer the tradition these days. But a show like 60 Minutes was able to maintain its independence. And that meant that every week they could put on whatever they put on the show, and the corporate headquarters, Redstone, could not come down and say, hey, you shouldn't put that stuff on. But because the Trump administration had issued this lawsuit against 60 Minutes, it meant that there's so much more attention on what 60 Minutes is doing, while at the same Sherry Redstone, who now controls a lot of Paramount, wants this merger that she's due to get a $1.5 billion paycheck if this whole works. She'll be out of the company. The Ellison family will end up controlling CBS and Paramount for $1.5 billion. It seems like quite a deal that they're getting. But Ellison is very tied to Israel. Ellison is very tied to Bibi Netanyahu, and they don't like some of the stuff that 60 Minutes keeps running, especially around the treatment of Palestinians in Gaza. And to her credit, McMahon, with that surname, you know that she is obviously allied to the Trump world, really stood up against the request by Sherry Redstone and the other people in the executive ranks. And she has put up a good fight in some ways to stop this incursion into the independent news of CBS News by the corporate entities. But it seems like she's lost. And so what we got now, because she's now resigning, because she decided that she's no longer can stay there, it suggests that there is a deal coming where perhaps CBS News will pay the Trump administration as much as $30 to $50 million to settle this lawsuit around the editing of the Kamala Harris interview on 60 Minutes. Now, this is a major problem for independent media and for reporting in the world. At the end of the day, we have the fourth estate as the key component that provides us the truth, that provides us a reality check on what's happening, that is able to talk truth to power. And as we see that diminish day by day through these lawsuits, there are so many lawsuits against different news organizations. the law is being weaponized against media organizations to really suppress any reporting that is critical of the administration. And in this case, it looks like any reporting that is critical of the Israeli invasion of Gaza. And that is a tragedy for America, because without the truth and with a government as corrupt as this, we will not know on a day-to-day basis what's going on inside the United States. The United States will, in a sense, be going dark. And that is going to be a factor of what people are calling news avoidance, an internal sort of censorship process that goes on with journalists who just don't want to cover stories because they don't want to get in their line of fire. And so you'll get this real chill on the truth. You'll get the real chill on reporting anything negative on the Trump administration. And what that will leave is a vacuum for disinformation to pour in, for lies to be poured in, and for America to really turn into an authoritarian state. It sounds incredibly chilling, and it is, in fact, incredibly chilling. And it's why there is such urgency right now to push back against so many of the things that are being done, as we were talking about last hour with the Trump tyranny tracker, and really assert what democratic rights we have, because what we're seeing now is a tragedy. I urge you to call everyone you can in the Congress to protect the fourth estate. And as you do that, also please consider that those of us who do this work as independents on Substack or elsewhere, we are now on the front lines. We're no longer just additional voices, influences, whatever. We are the next in line as they start taking all these lawsuits and Department of Justice actions against politicians and other journalists, and these lawsuits against big media organizations. Independents are next. And protect your independent media, protect your independent voices. It might be the only thing that's left after this big chill on the U.S. news establishment media takes an effect. We saw today that the Department of Justice dropped its traditional carefulness around charging any members of Congress. This was a measure that was originally put in after Watergate to stop this kind of corruption. And yet they are no longer following that containment rule. And we're seeing congressmen and congresswomen being charged. I guarantee you it will not be long before journalists are charged too for doing their work. And it's a very scary thought about where America is heading right now. That is that story. I do want to share with you one, perhaps a little bit more interesting story, because it's not interesting. It's what happened when Vice President Vance went to see the Pope. Pope Leo, of course, born in Chicago, the first American Pope. Marco Rubio was there. J.D. Vance was there. Masha, I don't know what her name. Masha Vance was there too. And just look at the subtleties of some of the interaction here, because I think it's really telling.
How are you? So good to see you. Thank you for having us again.
I like the pomp and ceremony of the Vatican. It's always really fascinating. Here they are, the Vatican Guard. And there's the VP. And way back here is his wife, second lady. And there's Pope Leo welcoming the Vice President into his chambers.
Good. So good to see you. Welcome. A couple of things. First of all, this is a letter from the President.
Swiss Guard, I'm sorry.
Inviting you to come to here. Many things to do, but wanted to make sure I gave that letter at some point. Yeah, of course.
That was an invitation from Donald Trump to come to the White House.
So this, of course, is Chicago Bears jersey. Good choice. With your name. And hopefully he
They
just...
tried to sign it with a pattern, but they got a little nervous.
Apparently,
Oh, I see.
did not
Okay.
succeed. Yeah, so I guess there's our kid right there, Ewan.
Okay.
You can probably imagine, in the United States, people are extremely excited about you and about your...
That reaction's interesting. Now listen to this.
An original bronze sculpture. The piece is a fragile flower, and an invitation that we can be partners.
Try
Which Pope Francis did not live in, and
Sure.
I may live in. It's
Okay.
totally the same, but
Oh, that's wonderful.
Which is right upstairs from here.
I'm thrilled to see that. Thank you.
For you. And then this is just a letter explaining the sculpture.
I see. Great.
And there's one of these for the secretary also.
Okay, wonderful.
So it's interesting that a piece is a fragile flower was the sculpture that the Pope gave J.D. Vance. I thought that was a very telling
Bye.
sentiment.
And we'll pray for you.
Thank you for being here for the celebration.
Yes.
I'm sure we will meet again and be in contact.
Okay, fantastic.
All
Thank you.
Very nice to
you
meet
very
you.
much.
Safe travel.
And I'm glad they'll be praying. Mr. Vance, of course, is a fairly new Catholic, but we'll be praying for the new Pope. It seems like a very cordial meeting. There's a couple of moments there where you realize that the past comments by the Pope on Mr. Vance has been quite direct and not very positive. We shall see now if Pope Leo will continue to be an advocate for the kind of things he's hinting at, with peace as a fragile flower. That's a very, of course, not hidden sentiment about what he's talking about, advocating for peace at a time when we're hearing the war drums in Europe and elsewhere in the world, and certainly the continuing war in Ukraine. It'll be interesting to see if the Pope does decide to visit the White House at the invitation of Donald Trump. There's certainly no love lost, it seems, between the two of them. All right, that's the best I can do on a solo effort here with all this video and everything playing. I hope you were able to enjoy today's FiveStack. I can guarantee you it'll be much better tomorrow when Dean Blundell joins us. And keep in mind, all these stories today, think about them as a theme, we really are seeing this watermark. I keep talking about this, a 6-month watermark that is a tipping point, really, at which point it's really hard to reverse the effects of this dictatorship state that's coming in, and we're fast approaching that. I think within the next 2 months we'll be there, and it's incredibly distressing when you see the kind of moves that are happening openly. The arrest of a political critic and the charging of a political critic who is a representative of the people, who is out there doing her work, oversight for her constituents, and doing so at these ICE raids, which are clearly against the law. You've got Kristi Noem, who doesn't even understand the law, who's making these decisions about whether we're deporting people or not. You've got the president himself offering these harsh comments about a caucus that is trying to defend their constituents, and is being very handed in his approach to pushing this bill that is ultimately going to cost Americans trillions of dollars in new debt. There is so little harmony in the world right now, and there is so much negativity and so much anti-democratic principles being enforced, and anti-democratic moves being made. And for me, the clincher is really what's happening, of course, at CBS News now. I worked there. I loved working there. It's a great network. And the work that 60 Minutes in particular has done has been something that I've admired for a very long time. And to see that venerable institution that you always knew you could rely on, that you always knew on Sunday nights you could turn on 60 Minutes, and you'd believe what they said because they did a good job. They gave you the news in a nuanced way, in an analytical way, but that was also very current and very much aware of the political mood and the agenda of the country. And to see 60 Minutes now before this fate of having to have their weekly editorials exposed to corporate, you might say, hey, that's okay. Why shouldn't corporate know about their weekly editorials? And in most cases, for most newscasts, maybe that's okay because the news isn't that contentious all the time. But when 60 Minutes is doing investigations, as they do, that are very tight-lipped and that they need to keep under wraps and that could be easily disrupted by someone getting notice ahead of time, they should be allowed to do that work in complete secrecy, because that is how you avoid people taking actions that could harm the journalists or harm the people that they're interviewing. And instead, what we're seeing is Paramount invading this private space, this walled space that has been a bastion of free speech and free press in America for as long as that program has been around. And I think it's been around for a very long time. I want to say 70 years. I'm not even sure. You know, this is not something we should be playing with at a time like this. We need our independent media. We need our independent journalism. And whether it's happening on 60 Minutes or not, you can guarantee that we'll continue to do it here on Substack and with my colleagues, as you've seen us do with Dean Blundell, and you've seen me with Olga Lautman and others. We'll continue to give you as much clear and fact-based information that is about what's happening in this authoritarian creep. There's no other way to describe it. In the next few weeks, we're expecting to see even more and more signs of freedoms being basically taken away from people. If anything happens with habeas corpus, it's a sign of real terror. And then this idea that we're having right now of the political prisoners, of these political critics being criminally charged left, right, and center, even Jim Comey. There seems to be so much going on about suppressing any opposition, suppressing the critics. I will remind you as well that on the 15th of June, there will be a big day of protest, as the president also has his military parade and birthday. That could be a big flashpoint. Some people are expecting a lot of people to show up. If you do go, please stay safe and avoid any violent situations. And also, in everything we do going forward, you have to think like they think. You have to understand that they are probably listening to conversations. They're probably analyzing things that you're doing. So be smart about how you approach situations. Stay out of violence. Always practice a non-violent approach in these protests if it comes forward, because it's so important that these protests are what carries the voice of the people going forward. It doesn't look like the news media is going to be doing it. It doesn't look to me like the politicians are going to be capable of doing it. I'm not even sure the judges and the courts are going to be able to keep up with it for very much longer. It's going to be ultimately the people of the United States of America that have to take whatever message it is they want to take to Donald Trump, and do it forcefully. That is the FiveStack. Tomorrow, Dean Blundell will be back. Thank you for being here, and I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your support, and have a great day.